The four custodians met formally for the first time on the third day after the alignment, in a room above ground with windows, because Kofi had insisted that the people who maintained the world's hidden infrastructure should at least be able to see the sun while they discussed it. The room was on the second floor of Ironhaven's administrative compound, a meeting hall with high ceilings, whitewashed walls, and windows that opened onto the courtyard where the defenders had assembled 3 nights ago. The morning light came through the eastern windows in broad, warm shafts that caught the dust motes and turned them to gold. The table was dark wood, scarred by decades of administrative use, large enough for 12, but occupied by 4. Clay cups of tea sat at each place, ruibos from the southern territories, dark red, cooling toward drinkable temperature. The room smelled of whitewash and warm wood and the faint, dry sweetness of the Harmattan's last breath before the rainy season. 4 custodians, each carrying the permanent evidence of what the convergence had cost their bodies. Ascension sat at the eastern end of the table, where the light caught his hair, white now, completely white, every strand bleached by the ancestral bridge's activation. He was 29. He looked 40. The shadow binding hummed through him in a continuous, low frequency that Kofi's system sight registered as a steady amber pulse at the edge of his silhouette. 1,000 ancestors speaking through one young man. The weight of it had aged him. The hair was the visible evidence. The invisible evidence was in his eyes, darker, deeper, holding a depth that no 29-year-old's eyes should hold. WuDon sat at the western end, closest to the open window, tilted slightly toward the sounds of the courtyard below the vendors, the children, the percussion of daily life. She was compensating. Her hearing had been damaged during the communion flood, the full aperture activation that had channeled 47 root line nodes simultaneously through her nervous system. The damage was permanent. Not deafness, reduction. A muffling of high frequencies, a compression of the sound spectrum that made human speech muddy at distance and music imprecise. She pressed her palms flat on the table periodically, reading vibrations, the Guardian's communion translated into a physical compensatory behavior. The root lines spoke to her through stone and wood. Human voices were harder. Zueta sat at the south end, with Mariama's encoded smock folded on the table before her. The thread scars on her wrists were silver in the morning light, the encoding frequencies permanent marks from the night she had wielded her mother's creation as a shield. The scars ran from her palms to her forearms in thin lines that traced the cipher's structure, less dramatic than Tibigia's full burns, but permanent, a pattern keeper's occupational marks. Kofi sat at the north end. His cane leaned against the table's edge, a simple wooden staff he had acquired 2 days ago when the knee made clear that unassisted walking was finished. The cane was temporary. A proper brace was being crafted by the guild's metalworkers. For now, the improvised support served. The knee throbbed with the steady, grinding ache of bone pressing bone, the cartilage gone. The joint's architecture collapsed under the weight of conducting cosmic amplified frequencies through a body that had been marginal from birth. Every step was a negotiation. Every staircase was a campaign. The reformed mind processed the pain data with clinical precision and filed it in the category of permanent operating costs. 4 custodians, white hair, muffled hearing, scarred wrists, ruined knee. The human cost of conducting power through bodies not built for it, not destruction a transaction. The honest price of maintaining a system that served the world. Kofi opened the meeting.
The custodian network activates today, not as ceremony, as infrastructure. The 4 fragment connections become a continuous monitoring system. Each of us holds one piece. The system's health depends on all 4 pieces communicating.
How?
Ascension asked. His voice carried the resonance of the shadow binding, a faint harmonic beneath the human register, as if someone were speaking behind him, just out of hearing.
The fragments have been isolated for 1,000 years. The connections restored during the convergence were crisis connections. We were fighting. We have not tested whether the connections hold under normal operating conditions.
Then we test them now.
Kofi placed his palms on the table. The reformed mind extended through the system, not the crisis mode surge of the convergence, but a controlled, diagnostic reach. The conductor's function: perceive all four fragments simultaneously, assess coherence, identify drift. He felt Ascension first. The shadow binding registered as a boundary, warm, defined, carrying the ancestral baseline against which system health was measured. The 1,000 ancestors humming in a continuous chord that was simultaneously history and diagnosis. Then WuDon. The root lines registered as depth, geological, vast, the communion channel that connected the surface system to the guardians below. 47 groves, 4 crystallized beacons, an underground network that served as the system's circulatory system. Then Zuwera. The encoding registered as language, the pattern keeper's connection to the first loom, the unified notation flowing through every enchanted textile in the territories. The tapestry's recording function, the system's memory. And then himself. The unified knowledge registered as integration, the conductor's function, the coordinative perspective that held the other 3 in simultaneous awareness and monitored their interaction. "I can feel you," WuDon said. She pressed her palms harder against the table. Her eyes were closed. "All of you, like phantom limbs, awareness of presence without detail. Ascension in the east, Zuwera in the south, Kofi everywhere." She opened her eyes. "The network holds."
Confirm.
Ascension said. The shadow binding pulsed. Kofi felt it as a warm ripple along the system's boundary, a diagnostic ping traveling the perimeter and returning.
The boundary reads all 4 fragments as active and connected. No drift, no corruption signatures.
Encoding confirms.
Zuwera said.
The first loom's tapestry has been recording all 4 connections since the convergence. The archive shows continuous coherence, no degradation.
4 fragments, 4 custodians, 1 network. The system's distributed architecture functioning as designed for the first time since the Zagale built it, and the factions stole their pieces and walked away. Kofi turned to the 5th chair. Tohage sat apart from the table. Not at it, beside it, in a chair he had pulled to the room's eastern corner, where the sunlight hit the floor but not him. The former cage maker was in shadow. Both eyes brown, both hands human. The absence of the 3rd skin had left him diminished in ways that went beyond the physical. The obsidian's vitality had sustained him for 20 years, and without it, he looked his age for the first time since the integration. Lean, precise, the body of a former Ashvale commander who had maintained his conditioning through discipline rather than magic, but whose face now carried the 20 years of erosion the stone had concealed. He sat with his arms folded, and his expression carrying the specific tension of a man sitting across from the people who had destroyed his life's work.
Tohage.
Kofi said.
The network requires oversight. We discussed this.
You discussed it. I was offered a position with the specific understanding that refusal would result in imprisonment or worse.
Tohage's voice was flat, all human. The bifurcated harmonic was gone, and without it his voice was ordinary, a man's voice, tired, carrying the specific bitterness of someone who had been brilliant and dangerous and was now being asked to be useful instead.
You accepted.
I accepted because the alternative was a cell. Let us not pretend this is anything other than what it is.
He unfolded his arms and leaned forward. The sunlight caught the edge of his face, the cheek that had been obsidian, now flesh, the skin there slightly different in texture, smoother, the way new skin looks after a burn has healed.
I know every vulnerability in this system because I built the trap that exploited them. I know how concentration corrupts because I concentrated. I know the early signs, the subtle frequency shifts, the unauthorized accumulations, the diagnostic anomalies that precede a corruption event because I created those signs in myself for 20 years.
He looked at each custodian in turn. Ascension, whose ancestor he had tried to steal, WuDon, whose guardian he had poisoned, Zuwera, whose mother's work he had corrupted, Kofi, whose conducting line he had nearly crushed.
Use me or lose me.
Tohage said.
I know what I am, I know what I was. I know the difference between those two things is a 60-40 bet made by a scavenger with a ruined knee.
He looked at Kofi.
I sat across from you on the chamber floor and accepted because you saw something in me that I have not yet verified in myself. The conviction that drove me, the genuine belief that the system matters, you bet that conviction survives the loss of the method. I do not know if you are right, but I am here, and I would rather be the watchdog than the prisoner.
The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was not meant to be. Tohage's acceptance was pragmatic, not penitent. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was offering competence. The distinction mattered.
The auditor's role.
Kofi said,
Continuous system monitoring. Diagnostic analysis of all 4 fragment connections. Early warning for corruption signatures, unauthorized accumulation or fragment drift. You report to the network, not to any single custodian, not to any faction, to the network as a whole.
And if I detect a problem,
you raise the alarm. All 4 custodians respond, collectively.
And if one of the 4 is the problem,
then 3 respond, and the auditor provides the diagnostic evidence.
Tohage was quiet. His jaw worked, the calculation of a man processing implications, at the speed of the intelligence that had understood the system deeply enough to break it.
That is a better architecture than I expected from a scavenger.
Scavengers build with what they find. I found a man who understands vulnerabilities. I am using him.
You are trusting me.
I am gambling on you. Trust takes longer.
Kofi held his gaze.
60-40. Those odds have not changed. But the system's alternative to gambling on you is operating without an immune response to the exact kind of threat you represent. And I would rather have the immune response.
Tohage's jaw unclenched. Not relaxation, acceptance. The specific, grudging acceptance of a man whose competence had been recognized even as his methods had been condemned. It was not redemption. It was utility. And for a man who had spent 20 years proving that he was necessary, being used was closer to purpose than any forgiveness could provide.
I accept the role.
He said formally, as if signing a document.
I will monitor, I will report. I will not interfere with custodian operations unless interference is required to prevent corruption, and I will understand if none of you trust me for a very long time.
Kofi nodded, turned to Zara. She stood at the window. 60 years old, her face lined with the accumulated weight of 43 years of sealed truth, her hands clasped behind her back, in the posture of a woman who had held authority for so long that authority's posture had become her resting state.
Pogna Zara.
Kofi said the formal title, the last time he would use it.
The earth-bonded seal.
Zara turned from the window. The morning light was behind her, gilding her outline, catching the gray in her hair. She crossed to Azindo, stood before the young man with white hair and ancient eyes, extended her hands. The transfer was quiet. No ceremony, no invocation. Zara placed her palms over Azindo's and the earthbond seal, the triple-line frequency that connected the bearer to the land's geological substrate, the oldest continuous authority in the territories, passed from one carrier to another the way warmth passes from one hand to another in a clasp. Kofi felt it through the conductor's perception. The seal's frequency shifting, detaching from Zara's signature, attaching to Azindo's. The ancestral voices in the shadow binding recognizing the transfer and adjusting their channel. The root lines registering a new earth bond point. 43 years of authority, released in the time it took to hold an old woman's hands and feel the warmth leave them. Zara stepped back. Her hands fell to her sides. She looked lighter, not diminished, unburdened. The specific lightness of a person who has set down a weight they have been carrying since before the person they are handing it to was born.
I am tired,
She said, not to the room, to Kofi. The specific, personal admission of exhaustion that she would only make to the man who had forgiven her on a chamber floor.
I am tired of carrying it.
Then rest.
Kofi's voice was gentle. The reformed mind's clinical precision, softened by the scavenger's understanding of what it cost to put something down after holding it for 43 years.
The system does not need you to carry it anymore. The system needs you to teach others how to carry it.
A teacher.
A necessary one. The next generation needs to know what happens when truth is sealed instead of shared. You are the case study.
Zara laughed. Wet, quiet. The laugh of a woman who had been afraid for 4 decades and had set down the fear along with the seal.
A warning and a teacher. Same thing in the right hands.
The tea was cold. The dust motes had settled. The courtyard sounds drifted up through the windows, vendors calling prices, children laughing, the percussion of wooden pestles striking mortars as the morning meal was prepared. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a world that did not know it was being maintained by 4 damaged people and 1 dangerous auditor sitting in a room with windows. Kofi picked up his cane. Stood, the knee ground, bone on bone, the familiar, permanent complaint that would accompany every standing and every step for the rest of his life. He breathed through it. The pain was the cost. The cost was honest. He would pay it every day because the system was worth maintaining, and the body that maintained it was the only one he had.
The custodian network is active.
He said,
Tuesday diagnostics begin next week. Each custodian runs their fragment's maintenance protocol and reports through the network. The auditor monitors all 4 reports for consistency.
He looked at each of them. The white-haired boundary keeper, the muffled-hearing root line guardian, the thread-scarred pattern keeper, the dangerous, diminished watchdog, the tired teacher standing at the window with empty hands and the lightness of a burden released. Imperfect, contested, fragile, alive.
The system was never meant to belong to one person.
Kofi said,
Not to Tohaje, not to Zara, not to anyone. It was meant to be maintained by people willing to pay the cost of maintenance. We are those people. The cost is visible on our bodies. The work begins now.
He limped toward the door. His cane clicked against the wooden floor, the steady, rhythmic sound of a man who had been marginal his entire life and had learned to walk with whatever body he had, through whatever pain he carried, toward whatever work needed doing. The custodian network was active. The fragments were connected. The system was being tended. And the work, the real work, the unglamorous Tuesday by Tuesday maintenance that would determine whether the reunification survived, was just beginning.